Okay, folks, we're ready to go here in just a minute, as soon as the candidates get up here. While they're coming up here, let me introduce, just talk to you briefly. My name is Robert Dawes. I'm the board president of the Durango Trust Board, president of the Durango Foundation, Education Foundation, sorry. And we used to be called Durango Foundation for Educational Excellence, but we changed it to something a little bit easier to say. And this is the first time we've sponsoring the Candidates Forum, and we're proud to do that. And we welcome you here tonight. I've been asked to say that the Durango School Board is having a special meeting tonight, so there aren't any school board members here or administrators, which is sort of unfortunate, but this is the way it just happened to work out. I would note, however, that even though we're in Durango, there are in the 59th district, which this campaign is about, I think there's probably about a dozen school districts, not just Durango. So I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce people. First, State Representative Michael McLaughlin. He's the current state representative. He has been a lawyer in Durango about 40 years. He served as assistant district attorney. He's worked for the Colorado State Attorney General's office for a couple of years and was Solicitor General in Washington, D.C. and argued before the Supreme Court on behalf of the United States government. On the right is a former representative, J. Paul Brown. He was a representative for 2 years in the state legislature, and he has been school board member of Ignacio for I think 12 years, and he was a La Plata County Commissioner for, was it 4?
Yes, sir.
And he's a rancher from Bayfield area, and a lifetime resident, I believe. Is that right?
Pretty much.
Okay. And our moderator tonight is Elizabeth Helvey. Ms. Helvey is right here, and she'll be up here. She is has a 20 years experience as a negotiator on public policy issues, primarily in the area of nuclear waste management. She and her family live here in Durango for the last couple of years, and she is well suited for this particular role. And we have a timekeeper tonight, which is our board vice president, Jean Thweet, former principal and teacher from Riverview, a long-time educator. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Helvey to explain the rules before we get started.
Thank you, Rob, and good evening to the candidates and to our audience. I want to thank you very much for coming to the Durango Education Foundation's Candidate Forum tonight. Before we begin, let me briefly run through the ground rules and the format for the debate. Signs and banners are not allowed, so if anybody brought those, please leave them on the floor. The audience is asked to refrain from clapping or commenting on either candidate's response. We are filming the events tonight, and a link will be available for those on the Durango Education Foundation's website. If you have any questions for the candidates, there will be paper, or has been paper, I'm not sure, handed out. You can fill out your question on those pieces of paper. You see some of the volunteers. Would you guys hold your paper up again? You can see the volunteers around the room. They'll be handing out those pieces of paper. When you're done, raise your hand and they will collect that paper for you. If we have time at the end of the debate, we will ask audience questions. If we run out of time, the candidates have graciously agreed to stay after and will be available to answer questions individually at that point. Now, on the format of the debate, each candidate will have 3 minutes to give their opening remarks. Then I will ask the questions, and they will have 1 minute each to respond. The candidate who answered the question first will then have 1 minute to respond to those answers. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. And candidates, please feel free, if you need me to repeat a question at any point, just let me know. I'm happy to do that. And our timer, Jean, was just introduced to you. Thank you, Jean. She will be holding up a yellow card with 15 seconds on it to indicate when you have 15 seconds remaining on your answer, and then she'll hold up a red card, excuse me, when you have 5 seconds remaining on your answer.
Yeah,
And she's an ex-principal, so we'll take that into account. Okay, we are ready to begin, and there was a coin toss earlier tonight to determine which candidate would start. And I believe, Mr. Brown, you have chosen to begin your opening statement first. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Well, thank you very much. I really do appreciate the Durango Education Foundation for having this forum tonight. I think it's very important. Education is very, very important. It's important to me. I spent 12 years on the Ignacio School Board, and I enjoyed that very much. I learned a lot about unfunded mandates, and I learned a lot about what school boards don't do. And most of the decisions really are made at the federal and state level. Life's experiences have given me a lot of different knowledge. As you probably can imagine, the state legislature, we have all kinds of bills that come before us, and we need to be knowledgeable in a lot of different areas. I was on the school board for 12 years, and and I have a granddaughter in the Ignacio school system right now. Education is very, very important to me. I was named Legislator of the Year by the community colleges in 2012, and I've been in agriculture and a businessman all of my life. Debbie and I, my wife, we're working on 38 years together, and she sure does improve my image when she's with me, and I'm glad that she's here tonight. But I've been in agriculture, and agriculture is the second leading industry in the state of Colorado at $40.1 billion, and that's very important. There's only one other legislator in the House that is knowledgeable about agriculture. Also, I spent 2 years in the legislature, and I was on some very important committees. I was on the Transportation Committee, where I learned that 50% of our highways are in poor condition, and that's something that we really need to talk about. I was also on the Ag Committee and the Health and Environment Committee. That's a very important committee with healthcare costs going up and the problems that we have in the healthcare industry. And then I was also on the Capital Development Committee. And those are just, they gave me a lot of experience that will really help me as a state representative. We'll see how things go tonight. Thank you very much for being here. I would really appreciate your support, and look forward to a spirited debate tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin, you're next. You have 3 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me. I think this is the second time we've had a forum with the Durango Educational Foundation. We had one last year about Amendment 66. It was very informative to me. So I'm State Representative Mike McLaughlin. I was elected in 2012, and I defeated J. Paul Brown in the last election, and I'm now facing him again in this election. I only mention that because I believe that there is such a tremendous contrast on the issues of education, which is why we're here tonight, that I think that you will see in my voting record, in my beliefs, and in my standards that I am a champion of education. In fact, I believe that education is probably the one single most important thing that the state does in terms of furthering the interests of democracy and preparing our children for the future. There's a reason why we have strong schools in a democratic society, and I totally support that. I've resided in Durango for 41 years. There was a time in the 70s and 80s when I was also a member of a law firm. We represented the school board. So I've seen some of the issues from the inside out. As all of you who know anything about education in Durango know, I'm also married to Barbara McLaughlin, Lifetime Achievement Award from the High School Press Association, outstanding teacher at Durango High School. And when I have issues about education, and I really don't know what I'm talking about, or I need to learn something, I talk to Barbara. And so she's a tremendous asset to my educational information. And if I say the wrong thing, I'm sure she'll correct me. The education is the most important thing, and one of the reasons that I wanted to get into state government. I'm not a career politician, and I didn't run for office until 2012, when Mr. Brown and I had our first race. That was my first time in elective office. Previous to that, the last time I ran for office was in junior year of high school when I was elected junior class president. So I've got a pretty good run. I've won 2 elections in my life. The reason I think that I've been a very effective legislator is because I'm very bipartisan. I serve on the Ag Committee also, which, as Jay Paul will let you know, if you serve on the Ag Committee, you cannot, by definition, serve on the Education Committee because they meet at the same time on the same date, so you can't serve in both committees. I'm also a member of the Judiciary Committee. When I'm reelected, I intend to go on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, another committee that I want to serve on. I have the endorsement of the Colorado Education Association, which is the teachers, and I also have the endorsement of the Colorado school executives. And these are the people that are the school administrators throughout the state, and they've looked at my record, they've looked at my voting, they've looked at my arguments. Thank you. My time is up.
All right, thank you. All right, so we will now turn, thank you for your opening remarks. We will now turn to the questions. And the first question, we will start with you, Mr. Brown. And it is, what do you see as the state's role in education?
It's a very, very important part of the state of Colorado. Over 50% of the general fund is dedicated to K-12 education. We have Amendment 23, which was passed by the people of the state of Colorado, and which mandates, at this time anyway, that the budget for schools be taken into consideration up to inflation, at least inflation, plus any pupil increase. It's very, very important. I think it's very, very important to me. That is one of the main things that we do. I do think that we have too many state and federal mandates, and I would like to see us decrease that so that schools can do what they need to as far as getting education done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, Mr. McLaughlin, you have 1 minute on that same question. What do you see as the state's role in education?
As I said in my opening statement, the role of the state of Colorado and the role of every state in a democratic society is to ensure that we teach and educate our children to be free thinkers, to be well-grounded in science, math, the basics which they will need to perform either in higher education or in their jobs, and to be a part of a strong global economy. There's a reason that every nation in the country that competes globally in the world has a strong education system, and that is what the role of the state of Colorado is in terms of education. We do that in basically 3 ways. One, with funding, because we have taken over the responsibility of the majority of funding for our student education. We also do that with respect to oversight and establishment of standards, the standards to make sure that our kids who graduate and receive a high school diploma from the state of Colorado are qualified to participate in democratic society.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Brown, you have 1 minute to respond to that if you choose.
Well, I would just like to say that we have way too much influence in our schools by the federal government, and I think that we need to get back to educating our kids without involvement. of the federal government. We need to continue to fund education as we should. We have the negative factor that needs to be taken into consideration. The state did not fund schools up to what they were supposed to under Amendment 23 in the past few years, and so there's a negative factor. The schools haven't gotten the money that they were supposed to, and we need to make that up.
Thank you. All right, so then we'll now move on to the next question, and Mr. McLaughlin will be the first one asked that question. What do you consider the appropriate balance between state management of education and local school board decision-making?
I think the appropriate balance is pretty much in the way that we have it now. We have the state setting educational standards for graduation, for achievement. Those goals and those objectives are set after careful deliberation. They have come out through a complete discussion in the educational community, the teachers, the students, the academics, and I believe that the school boards have a very important role in certain elements of local control. I think one of the issues that we see coming forward today that needs to be addressed is curriculum. Our curriculums must be based upon science. They must be based upon intelligence. They must be based upon a true stating of our history. In the state of Colorado, we're having a dispute, for example, in Jefferson County, over the school board wanting to change the curriculum standards for the teaching of history. They want to do away with the history of the United States and show that we have lived in a placid environment. We are a democracy. We are a place that has always had robust debate. We've always had dissent. We've always had discussion. And those are the things that I think the school board should be furthering, and I think the school board should be working with the state, working together to make sure that together they produce a better educated student.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I believe that the state is too heavy-handed as far as as them taking telling school boards what they needed to do on curriculum. Ignacio's different from Durango, and we need to figure out. My son Levi, I think third grade, had a teacher that figured out that he loved horses, and so she had him reading books about horses. He learned to read well doing that. School districts are the same way. Different school districts need to have the flexibility to set their own curriculum, and I think the state has too much influence on that.
And Mr. McLaughlin, when you have 1 minute to respond to that.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Brown to the respect that the local school board should have the authority to set certain matters, but on the core values, when you talk about curriculum, you can't have a school board that wants to teach something that didn't exist in history, or wants to teach something that doesn't have something that isn't born in science, doesn't have a scientific basis. We need to teach our children about reality, and we need to discern the differences between mythology, ideology, and fact. And so what a real school board does is they take the science and the materials available and make sure that the children learn those. I would have no problem whatsoever with any teacher who want to use horses or any other animals or any other plant or any other thing as a vehicle to teach a kid how to read. I think that's a wonderful thing. And I don't think any existing standards would prohibit that now.
All right, thank you. And so now we're now moving on to question number 3, and this will go to Mr. Brown first. What should Colorado do to prepare students for the growing demands for technology and critical thinking skills needed for the current and future economy?
Well, Colorado needs to suggest the curriculum that for the different school districts, and work with the school districts to try to come up with the kind of curriculum needed for that technology. And I think that is being done very well in many school districts. But there are, also there's a need for vocational training. And some different districts may be more attuned to that. There are a lot of people in the vocational trades that make a very good living, and there's a big need for people. I just talked to the Asphalt Association this week here, and there's a huge need for vocational training. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin, you have 1 minute for your answer.
I would agree with Mr. Brown on certain aspects, especially with vocational education. I think that we have, I think, intended to do well, but we've focused too much on everyone going to college, and that's certainly not the situation. We need to make sure that our vocational training programs are strong. I'm seeing in the audience a local car dealer. I had a conversation with him about a year ago, and he was telling me that we don't have people that are qualified to run some of the new diagnostic machines that they need in the automobile business to deal with the new machinery that's in there. And so any vocational training that will have a technological aspect is also something I would completely support. I think we're looking at the future. I think that we're going to need expanded broadband. As you know, we did expand broadband in rural Colorado this year in the state legislature, and I look forward to the time that every child has access to internet and broadband and all technology.
All right, Mr. Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I agree. Kids, even if they're in vocational training, they're really, when I need somebody to help me with my phone, I go to my 5-year-old granddaughter, and so it's important. Technology is important, and kids just absorb it, and we use it in the vocational trades, and that's just something that I think that it is easy to get kids to interested in, and we certainly need to continue with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Question number 4. This will start, Mr. McLaughlin, you'll be the first one to answer this question. Colorado presently holds the 40th position nationwide for per pupil funding. What do you consider adequate per pupil funding for Colorado students?
Well, first of all, given the present environment, and I'm talking about Tabor, I'm talking about Gallagher, I'm talking about the other constraints on taxation in Colorado, we have used our available funding as best we can. I think at one time we were actually lower than 40th. Our economy has recovered to a little bit and has allowed us to do better. I believe that funding is a very important element of education. I don't believe, however, it's the most important element. I think the most important element in education is parental involvement. And by that I'm talking about making sure your child gets up and goes to school with a good night's sleep. Make sure your child has a good breakfast. Make sure your child is well prepared. Make sure your child comes to school ready to learn. But funding is extremely important, and I will address it, and I have materials to show what we did this year in the state legislature regarding funding.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown, 1 minute for that question.
Funding is very, very important, and it's limited. And we've gone through some tough years. The Ritter administration figured out how to bypass Amendment 23, and successfully did that. But there are good years too. And the legislature has to set priorities. K-12 education has to be one of the top priorities that we have. This last year, we had $1.4 billion extra to work with. And the legislature did honor Amendment 23, but they only sent $100 million back for the negative factor. And I think that we just have to prioritize and make sure that we take care of those educational needs.
Thank you. And Mr. McLaughlin, you have 1 minute to respond to that.
Well, I want to focus on what we accomplished in the legislature this year, because we did put an additional $500 million into K through 12 education in the state of Colorado. Now, to be frank with you, I'd love to claim credit for all of that, but the fact of the matter is our economy, through the leadership of Governor Hickenlooper and others, has coming back so that we now have more revenue. When we have more revenue, we're able to address more of our issues. We increased our per pupil funding. We increased the reduced the negative factor. We increased investment in early childhood education. We did a lot of things that we're attempting to do with Amendment 66, which is what we talked to you about last time when we had this forum. Mr. Brown and others actively defeated Amendment 66. That would have been one of the solutions that would have allowed us to have more equitable funding. I spoke in favor of that. I think that the people made their decision, and I'm prepared to live with it. But I think that we did do a very good job this year with what we had.
All right, thank you. And moving on to question 5, Mr. Brown will answer this question first, but it's on Amendment 68. And just as a little bit of background first, Amendment 68 is on the ballot for this election, and if it's approved, it will establish a K through 12 education fund financed by tax revenues raised by expanding gaming at horse racetracks in 3 counties in the state. And now to the question. What is your position on Amendment 68, and why do you hold this position?
I oppose Amendment 68. I don't believe that we should use gambling money for K-12 education. I just and there are a lot of other reasons that that I oppose Amendment 68. It's my understanding that that a group from another state has come in and they're trying to expand gambling in Colorado, and I think we frankly have a problem with gambling, and so I oppose 68.
Thank you. And Mr. McLaughlin, you have 1 minute to answer that question as well.
You know, one of the reasons that we have to remember in government is just because 2 people agree does not mean that somebody's wrong. I agree with Mr. Brown on this. I think Amendment 68 is a really bad idea for a number of reasons. Number 1, it only benefits a New Jersey casino. Number 2, it only really, one of the critical issues in education is adequate funding. What this does is just kick the problem of adequate funding through K through 12 down the road further. We don't address the true issues. It's another gimmick to raise money, which is they're saying is only going to education. So I'm very much in favor of horses. I like horse racing, but I'm against Amendment 68.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Brown, do you want to use your minute to answer that, to respond to that?
No, I think I'll save you guys the time.
Okay, thank you. It seems there's enough agreement, we can move on from that one. All right, and question number 6. This is, Mr. McLaughlin will answer this one first. And this, you've been hearing about Amendment 23, and for those in the audience, I'll just give a quick background. I realize most of you are probably familiar. Amendment 23 was a constitutional amendment passed in 2000 that requires K through 12 funding to increase annually by a specified amount. In 2009, the legislature reinterpreted Amendment 23 in order to reduce education funding for 3 years. The state currently holds over $1 billion of the original Amendment 23 funds that would have been distributed to school districts. And now for the question, Mr. McLaughlin. With education funding significantly behind what Amendment 23 requires, what is your position on the funds collected under Amendment 23 that are being held by the state?
Thank you. It's a very good question. I think that what we dealt with Amendment 23 is they put in a state-adopted mandate requiring a continued increase of funding by the state legislature. And what happened is in 2008, we went through this worldwide recession and the monies were not available. So I'm in favor of the continued reduction of the negative factor. But I am in favor of continuing to hold our reserves. That's one of the things that we learned in this recession is we did not have adequate education reserves. We didn't have education revenues. So I'm in favor of what the legislature did in 2009 when neither Mr. Brown nor and I were in the legislature. I would also be willing, however, to take a look at it and see if there are things that we can do to continue our security for our schools, our school funding, and at the same time comply with the requirements of 23. I'm willing to look at it.
And Mr. Brown, 1 minute for your answer.
Okay, Amendment 23 was passed, like you said, in 2000. I was on the school board at Ignacio when it was passed, and it mandated that the funding for K-12 education be for inflation plus 1% for 10 years. And the Ritter administration in 2009 figured out a way of bypassing that, and that created the negative factor. The Colorado Association of School Boards this year asked for $275 million, and I thought that was to start making up for that negative factor. I thought that was reasonable with the legislature having $1.4 billion to work with. However, they only funded it by $100 million.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin, you have a minute if you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, thank you. I was involved in that decision, and I agree with Mr. Brown that it would have been great if we could have taken the $250 million that the state school boards were requesting, even though they're giving me their endorsement. I do agree that they have an issue there. But the fact of the matter is we balanced all the different needs, and when you're looking at the whole plate of education, we felt that there were many other things that were more important or that deserved more money than the negative factor. And so that's why we balanced that $500 million into all these different areas. That I have a sheet that you can take a look at on your way out here, and you can see exactly how that money went. And for example, we put money into charter schools, we put money into early childhood education, we put money into increasing education, educational learning and skills and testing. And so that's where that money went. It would have been great if we had more money to put into the negative factor, but we didn't have it. So I think that was a wise decision considering all the elements of education.
All right, thank you. And then we'll move on to the next question, which is starting with Mr. Brown. There are many new requirements placed on teachers and administrators to implement new evaluations, new assessments, and new standards. These requirements are largely unfunded mandates. What would you do to help alleviate this growing burden?
I'd probably run a bill to do away with them. I do not agree with the unfunded mandates. If you're going to mandate something on the school districts, then pay for it. It's not fair to the teachers. It's not fair to the administrators. It's not fair to the school boards. And, we need to have standards. I believe that it's best set at the local level, and I just think we need to have more local control of our districts. That's school boards, teachers, administrators, students, parents, everybody. But I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, your 1 minute to answer that question.
Well, living with a teacher that's been dealing with some of the imposed standards and requirements and the testing that seems to be pretty much a monthly or weekly obsession at the high schools and all the other elementary schools, I agree with the general proposition that we need to focus on those parts of teacher work which don't require a constant testing and constant evaluation. But the fact of the matter is the legislature made a decision in 2010 to put emphasis on testing and standards to make sure that our children are able to graduate with skills, with knowledge, and so to that extent, it puts requirements on teachers, it puts requirements on the students. I don't think there's any student that will step up and say, I cannot wait to take another CSAP or another CCAP or any of that. it is an obligation, and I think we need to look at the experience since 2010 and see whether it's made an effect or not, whether or not those tests can be reduced or not. Overall, the concept of testing is what we have to do to make sure we meet standards.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Brown, do you want to use your 1 minute to respond to that?
No.
All right, we'll move on to the next question then. Question number 8, this is a two-part question. Colorado has adopted the Common Core standards for English language arts and mathematics. First, how familiar are you with the content of these standards? And second, do you agree with Colorado's adoption of them? Why or why not? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Well, I want to tell you that I heard a lot about Common Core during the time that they were being reviewed back in 2010, and but until I ran for the state legislature, and until actually most recently, and even today, I have been constantly trying to learn more and more about Common Core. I am familiar with them. I have read them. I've looked at them. They've been adopted in the great majority of states in the United States. I think the intent of Common Core with respect to math and science and English and language proficiency are good standards, and I believe that they are intended to produce a much better student. And so I'm familiar with them, and I agree with them. I think as a general rule, and again, if you look at Colorado, what Colorado did is they took the Common Core standards and they also reviewed other aspects of a child's education, and they adopted standards and efficiencies in other areas, such as even dance and physical education and geography, because math and English are not the only two things we want to have. So I do agree with, I'm familiar with, and I do agree with Common Core.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown, you have 1 minute to respond.
Common Core, there's some good things in Common Core, but there's some bad things in Common Core. You know, I've heard of math questions that are just horrendous. You know, none of us could figure out those math equations that the way that they are supposed to, these kids are supposed to learn that. It's a top-down program mandated by the federal government and maybe even by the United Nations. It is something, I don't agree with the Common Core, and I think that between Colorado and the local districts, we can come up with better standards, and that would be what I would suggest.
Okay, and Mr. McLaughlin, would you like to take your 1 minute to respond to that?
You know, whenever I hear Mr. Brown say that this is part of the United Nations conspiracy, or that it's part of an imposition of federal government in unfair ways, it kind of breaks my heart, because I actually have been to the United Nations, and I want you to know that School District 9R is not on their map. They're not trying to run our local schools and our local school control. But again, I think we need to have a healthy disrespect for the federal government, have to have a healthy observation of the federal government, but I don't believe that the federal government is behind Common Core. I believe Common Core is a result of entire academic discussion which has taken place over a long period of time, and I believe that Common Core, on balance, is better than what we had before, and will continue to improve our students and produce a higher qualified, more intelligent student than we had before.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the next question. This is for Mr. Brown to start with. Douglas County, Colorado has attempted to implement a pilot voucher program that allows students to use their state funding to attend religious schools. To what extent do you think school choice should be funded through taxpayer dollars?
I believe that, you know, I agree with the voucher system. I think that kids in private schools many times get a better education and get what their parents want them to have. I have some concerns about the cost because I don't think that the cost will be reduced at the local district area by taking this money and using it. Also, if I were parents, I would, when you use state money, when you use government money, many times there are strings that come with it, and pretty soon, instead of having a private school, you just got another government school. And so I just think that we need to be very careful with the voucher system, but I certainly think that we need to have choice for parents and students.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. McLaughlin, 1 minute.
You know, I have a unique educational experience because I lived on Air Force bases for the majority of my juvenile life until I was actually 19 years old. And I attended Air Force schools, and I attended parochial schools. I have 6 years of Catholic education. I'm a big believer in the parochial school system, but I believe that the parochial system is strong is because it is supported by, controlled by, and done by the people of their own faith. And I strongly support faith-based schools. However, the use of vouchers, in my opinion, has a constitutional issue that I cannot stomach and I cannot agree with. It's currently under review right now in the state Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will tell us whether or not the use of voucher systems to subsidize religious schools violates the First Amendment. And if the court says that it doesn't violate the First Amendment, then I'll say it doesn't violate the First Amendment. I personally believe it does violate the First Amendment. I think that subsidizing religious schools in and of themselves is not a good thing with public taxpayer money. And I oppose the voucher system for that purpose.
Okay, thank you. 1 minute to respond, Mr. Brown.
We'll see what the Supreme Court decides on this. You know, I have a big question about vouchers for religious schools, but just private schools. You know, I think there is a difference there, and we just need to see what the Supreme Court says.
Okay, so we'll move on to our next question. This one is for Mr. McLaughlin. How would you propose controlling tuition costs for Colorado public post-secondary education?
Well, one of the ways that you can control that is the state, acting as the legislature, has certain powers over restricting tuition. As you may know, in this particular session, I was the co-primary sponsor with another state legislator of the College Affordability Act, which allowed us to give an additional $105 million to higher education in Colorado, but at the same time require that they not increase their tuition more than 6% per annum, trying to set a cap on that. We have a huge problem in Colorado because unlike when I went to college, you could go to college anywhere, virtually anywhere, except an Ivy League school and work your way through school. You might have to get a couple student loans to pay some big tuition hits and stuff like that. But I went to college in Colorado from 1967 to 1970. I took out a little student loans and I was able to do it. So I think that, you know, we can do this in the legislature, but it's going to have to be with state control, and state has to fund it. But we have controlled increases in tuition this year.
Okay, and Mr. Brown, your 1 minute for an answer.
I don't know how students can go to school in Colorado. I'm not quite as ancient as my opponent, but just joking.
No, we agree you have youthful
Yeah.
inexperience.
But I worked through college too, and I went to New Mexico State, and was able to work my way and without any debt. These kids coming out of college today, out of Colorado schools, are in debt up to their eyebrows, and we just have to do something about it. I know that there are kids right here in the San Juan Basin that are going to New Mexico schools and paying half as much for in-state tuition. They give them in-state tuition down there. So I think we need to look at, what's New Mexico doing, what's Utah doing, and let's try to figure out some things to reduce this tuition costs.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, 1 minute to respond.
Well, we're in agreement on this, and like I said, we were able to do that this year. You can't just set an arbitrary cap. We know that arbitrary caps without foundation and without funding really don't mean anything, but we're able to cap tuition increases at 6% across the board in Colorado, and I think that's a good goal, and I'd like to see that reduced. But I agree with Mr. Brown. We need to do more and more that we can to make college more accessible to everyone.
And this is a follow-up question that came from one of our audience members. What are the key issues ahead for Fort Lewis, and how would you address those issues? Mr. Brown.
Well, the cost of doing business is always something that faces Fort Lewis as well as any other school. But, I was on the Capital Development Committee, and that was a very good committee because we went to prisons and we went to all the universities, and we looked at what the state of Colorado owned. We looked at Fort Lewis College. We've got some buildings at Fort Lewis that aren't being maintained like they should because there's not enough money to do that. I think that there needs to be more planning. That's an issue that faces Fort Lewis, and maintaining the student count. And how about those Fort Lewis Skyhawk football team? Man, I'm so proud of them for winning this last Saturday. Let's hope they can win tomorrow night too. No, 2 nights ago, Thursday night.
Okay, sorry. Mr. McLaughlin, your answer to the Fort Lewis question.
Well, again, I think Fort Lewis still remains, and we need to keep this in mind, the second lowest state tuition in the state college system. Other than Metro State, Fort Lewis is the best bang for your buck in education, in higher education in Colorado. Obviously, they need to continue to be competitive regarding their enrollment. I think that's a growing part of the big picture in state colleges. I was a little heartbroken when they beat my alma mater in football, but I've recovered, and I'm looking forward to working with Fort Lewis again in the coming year. As you know, I was able to work with all the members of the legislature and put together a package so that we were able to fully fund Burt Hall this year, and that means that Fort Lewis will get an additional $25 million to get the geophysical building going, a really important part of the growth of Fort Lewis College. And I continue to hope that I can serve Fort Lewis College in this capacity.
All right, thank you. Mr. Brown, do you have a follow-up to that?
Yes, as I mentioned, I was on the Capital Development Committee, and there's a priority system in that committee that's set up by the committee and by staff on priority needs. Fort Lewis College was in that priority lineup, and as well as Western State. And there's a little politics in the Capital Development Committee. And being in there, a lot of those other legislators want to move Fort Lewis and Western State down the list and move their schools up. I didn't let them do it. So we worked hard at that on the Capital Development Committee. Thank you.
Okay. And I believe this is the last question. The other audience comments or questions that we got were on Common Core, and I think those have been answered. So our last question, starting with Mr. McLaughlin, is, do you support taxpayer funding for early childhood education, such as preschool and full-day kindergarten? Why or why not?
My wife and I were fortunate when our children were born here in Durango, and we were able to privately fund our early childhood education. Our children started at the Children's House Montessori School. They were able to go to St. Columba Preschool. I don't think any parent that has a chance to give their child an early childhood education and early preparation for school would ever turn that opportunity down. I think that's something that we have neglected, and it shows every year in your graduation rates, in your success rates, et cetera, that those kids who are given a good, strong early childhood education start kindergarten ahead of the game of those who are not. So I totally believe, and I do believe in funding early childhood education and child care for our kids to make sure that they can compete in the global economy.
Okay, Mr. Brown, your answer, please.
You know, I would, I would love to support early childhood education. But the reality is when you do that, there's a limited amount of money. And you have to take away from K-12 education when you do that. And I think that we have to prioritize with K-12. We need to come back, you know, and really beef up our kindergarten and first grade classes to catch any kids up that need to be caught up. And we need to keep, I think, preschool and education separate from K-12 education. And if we do that, I think we can maintain that funding that we absolutely need for K-12. So, thank you.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I put my money where my mouth is because last year this issue came up in the School Finance Act, the Long Budget, and the School and Success Act. And the fact of the matter is, last year your state legislature put $17.1 million into early childhood education. It's a beginning, it's a start, and we need to, you know, there are no Western civilization, no country in the United States that, or in the world rather, that doesn't have a strong educational system, doesn't start their children at early childhood education. You've got to have early childhood education because otherwise, if you just leave it to the parents, sometimes they are working, sometimes they are too busy, sometimes they are uneducated, sometimes they are unskilled. So I will always support early childhood education.
All right, thank you. We do have 2 more audience questions that were submitted, and we have just actually time for 1 more. So we have one that actually we're not familiar with the bill, and so I'm going to ask SB, I assume that's Senate Bill 191, is that? Okay. So I believe Mr. McLaughlin went first. The question is, would you repeal Senate Bill 191? Mr. Brown, I think you get this one first.
No, I would not.
Could one of you give a quick explanation for the audience on what it is?
And that will be part of your time.
Okay. Senate Bill 191 was a bill that was passed. The teachers' unions didn't like it, and they still want to try to get rid of it. But it requires evaluations. Pay for performance is, I think, part of it. It is an avenue for different, for school boards to kind of weed out poor teachers. And I think it's a very, very good bill.
We're going to go ahead and start your time
Okay.
right now.
Yeah, it's a very good bill. I think that it needs to stay. It may need some tweaking, but it does give school boards the ammunition to get rid of really bad teachers. And you know, that's one of our problems in education is that we've got some excellent teachers like Mrs. McLaughlin here, and I want to commend you for your award. And I've talked to your students, and you're a very, very good teacher. You need to be paid for it. And there are other teachers that we need to encourage to find another vocation, quite frankly. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McLaughlin, 1 minute.
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Brown on what 191 did. 191 did have, in my opinion, one And in other words, it's a good thing to start having assessments of teachers, and it's a good thing to have a start of assessment of students, and that was what 191 basically tried to implement. I think the one part of 191 that I would take a look at again and see if it's really been effective and whether it's really fair is that part of 191 which gives 50% of its teacher's evaluation based upon the performance of the students. Because not every teacher is blessed with great students who are really working hard and trying to do well in their standard tests. I think there's a lot of, it's really unfair to put 50% of their performance on the teacher and say that it's all the teacher's fault. I think if we had a system where the parents would be graded with the children and the teachers, then that might be a little bit more fair. But the basic concept of 191 was a good beginning in terms of implementing fair standards.
And Mr. Brown, do you want to respond to that?
You know, I was on the school board for 12 years at Ignacio, and we talked about parental involvement every year, multiple times a year. And that is so, so important. But the reality is there are some parents that just aren't going to do it. We had kids that would go home and come back to school and never see their parents. And they were little kids too. And that happens all over the state of Colorado. But we absolutely need to be able to get rid of poor teachers. Don't mean anything bad about them, but your kids know who they are, and parents know who they are, and they know the good teachers too. They really know those good teachers, and so that 191 is a good bill, and we need to keep it.
All right, thank you. And with that, we are out of time for the debate. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Rob Dawes again. I just want to say thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, closing remarks. Okay, sorry, you got up. You jumped the gun on me. Okay, I'm sorry. We have a few more minutes for the debate. Closing remarks, we're going to start with Mr. McLaughlin, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak to you again on the issues of education. I think one of the most important things that affects our society, our state, our town, and our children. I'm a terrible committed advocate to education, and you can see in some of the responses that Mr. Brown and I oppose the distinct differences between he and I as far as what we would approach as far as the important issues of education. I would say that one of the reasons that I should be reelected is not only because of my interest in education and my desire to do the right thing with respect to our kids, but because I've been effective in the state legislature. You want to send somebody to the state legislature that can get things done. And if you look at my legislative record, you will see that I was asked by my leadership to carry major bills, the College Affordability Act, major parts of the Student Success Act, other parts of issues that are critically important to the state of Colorado, because they know that I can work with the other side. They know that I can sit down and talk with the Republicans, that I can get things done. And as a result of that, I have been an extremely effective legislator, and I will continue to be extremely effective legislator if re-elected. And I will speak for everyone in our community, not just a select few, but all of the kids, all the teachers, all the administrators, and all the concerns that you have in the state legislature. With respect to education, it's my #1 priority. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here today.
Okay, Mr. Brown, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you again for having us tonight. Appreciate the opportunity very, very much. Mr. McLaughlin mentioned that a good economy is what brings in more tax dollars. And when we have more tax dollars, we can prioritize K-12 education more and other forms of education also. And I believe that it is very, very, very important that we have a good, strong economy here in Colorado. And I will be working to do that just as much as I possibly can. We need to have good jobs. and that will bring prosperity to Colorado. I've been endorsed by the Colorado Association of Commerce and Industry, CASE, the Colorado Medical Society, the Colorado Dental Association, Green Industries of Colorado, Colorado Rural Electric Association, the Colorado Academy of Family Physicians, Colorado Ski Country USA, Rocky Mountain Associated Builders and Contractors, the Colorado Automotive Recyclers, the NRA, the Colorado Farm Bureau, and the Colorado Licensed Beverage Association. And that's unprecedented for someone who's not a sitting legislator to be endorsed by those organizations. And it's because they know that I will help business and make it stronger, and then we'll have more money for K-12 education. And that is the reason that we have a wonderful education system here in Colorado. I would appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Now we're done with the debate. Sorry for that hiccup. I do want to thank both of you very much for engaging with us on this important topic and spending this time. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Dawes for some closing remarks.
This was a great debate, don't you agree? This is what democracy is all about. I want to remind you that there's that the candidates have agreed to stay afterwards to talk if you have any more questions for them. We do have some refreshments back there, and this has been taped and will be posted on our website, which is durangofoundation.org. And while you're there, check us out and see what we do for local public schools. DurangoEducationFoundation.org. Sorry. That's my dyslexia coming through. Okay, thank you everybody for coming.